the next piece we wanted to show was the actual Vatican president, former Vatican president. We was talking about, if you're talking about Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, here is Ettori Gotti Tedeschi's take on why they needed the first or the initial reset.
So he's the president of the Vatican Bank, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the people that are listening, I'll read it for them. So it was conceived between the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s.
Anni 60, primi anni 70, colui che lo aveva.
He says its originator was Henry Kissinger at the very beginning. So now this stuff, Klaus Schwab is the founder. And so, he's the face, right? So now there's always the rings within rings, right?
Poi lo presentò all'inizio fu Henry Kissinger. Era un reset vero e proprio.
It says it was a veritable reset. We are trying to correct the mistakes.
Stiamo cercando di rivedere
that we have been making for the last 50 years.
Errori che sono stati fatti negli ultimi 50 anni.
Since the very first reset, also known as New World Economic Order.
Il primo reset o nuovo ordine economico mondiale,
which was designed in the 70s.
Che fu concepito negli anni 70, fondato su una serie di
and this was founded upon a series of facts which ignore natural law.
Fatti che ignorano leggi naturali, quindi
which we can define as not always natural and pretty utopian. Now he's referring to eugenics and the Malthusian problem.
Possiamo definire non sempre naturali e molto utopistici. Dopo 50 anni,
after 50 years since the first reset of the 70s,
questo reset fatto negli anni 70
produced several mistakes. A second reset is needed today.
Grazie agli errori che ha prodotto, oggi chiede un secondo reset.
The current reset, commonly called the Great Reset, is nothing but a correction.
Il reset di oggi, quello di cui si parla, il Great Reset,
of the mistake we've been making for 50 years.
Aggiornata.
Exactly. Of the mistakes which we have been making over the last 50 years.
Degli errori fatti negli ultimi 50 anni. Quindi grazie, insomma.
So therefore, thanks to, or rather, taking advantage of,
Prendendo l'occasione di questa situazione incresciosa che si chiama
this unfortunate situation called the pandemic,
la pandemia di Covid, ha la possibilità di accelerare.
There is the possibility to boost, or rather, I will use a strong expression.
E anche, se vogliamo, uso un'espressione forte,
to impose or cause to be imposed certain behaviors.
Imporre o far imporre determinati comportamenti.
Nevertheless, today's reset is the correction of the mistakes made by yesterday's reset.
Però il reset di oggi è la correzione degli errori fatti del reset di ieri.
First, a suggestion was made that is related to the Great Crisis.
Immaginata una proposta che è quella che ha provocato
we have been witnessing in recent decades. Now, what do you think this great crisis is? And you remember back in our Civilian podcast where we covered this idea that they called the population growth in Europe a crisis, right? It went from
26 million in France, they can't handle it and all this stuff.
Yeah. And so it produced a strain upon the food supply, the supply chain, all the same things that they say are happening
right now
today. Yeah. And so French Revolution, you're in the 1700s, right? So if it worked then, it's the same rhetoric is working now.
Yeah.
So
and it's because it's interesting. They were almost bankrupted while they were tinkering with American Revolution. So it's pretty much the same thing us doing, It's just like a tinkering in a world revolution.
So now we've switched roles. Now, what's bankrupt in the United States now, barring all this unnecessary money to send to countries that are at war.
Yeah.
And letting our infrastructure and our borders and all these, they did the exact same thing during those revolutionary times as they're doing now. And it's the same characters behind the scenes. This is a guy at the highest level here. Yeah.
It's funny, they'll talk about like common sense laws, but when it comes to do common sense stuff to make sure that your country is taken care of, all of a sudden the common sense is out of the window, So
we'll get to one of I think the video before the last where the former prime minister, or I don't know if it's a prime minister. We'll see who he is exactly, but he describes exactly what they're doing. He calls it the New World Order, and he gives a great detail plan about how they're actually rolling out and finishing off with the depopulation agenda. And so let's let him finish.
La grande crisi che ci portiamo dietro negli ultimi decenni.
And so this great problem is too many births, right?
Troppe nascite, e conseguentemente.
And as a consequence, the need to decrease the birth rate of the population.
No wonder abortion is a health crisis.
yeah. Think about it, right? So now this is coming from all these eugenicists, right? Who've always been about bringing down the carrying capacity of the earth, right? And so the spillage they see of the useless eaters or the human weeds, it's time for them to go. And so when they talk about decreasing the birth rate, he's going to next mention it was happening in an unfortunate place for them.
Wow. Yeah. Some of the elite were losing. I can say, okay, let's see.
La necessità di ridimensionare il tasso di crescita della popolazione. Qual è stato il primo effetto?
What was the very first effect of this process?
Vero, concreto, con cui si avvia questo processo?
The birth rate dropped, but where? In the Western world.
No.
Not there.
Quello delle nascite. Ma dove? Nell'Occidente.
The shrinking of the population took place mainly in the so-called Western world.
Il crollo della popolazione è stato nel cosiddetto mondo occidentale.
The United States and Europe. Why is the population growth rate supposed to be reduced?
Uniti d'Europa soprattutto. Che va ridotto il numero della popolazione perché?
Because according to a neo-Malthusian worldview, the more people are born,
in questa opinione neo-malthusiana ambientalista, più gente nasce, più gente consuma.
They consume, there you go.
The more people consume, the more people waste what nature provides for us.
Well, nature provides it for us. Okay.
Più gente spreca quello che la natura ci mette a disposizione.
Okay, that brings us to the end of that one. So now we have, we're starting to see that there's this, behind the scenes. There's always, as the saying goes, there's always a story behind the story that was told to you.
Yeah.
And so as we see,
kind of the motto of the Iconic podcast too, telling the iconic truth behind the historical fiction.
Right. And so we just let these guys tell it, right? Because he's going back. And he's saying, like, hey, you guys are hearing that it's Klaus Schwab and it's his book, The Great Reset, that we're following, right? And then Tedeschi's like, well, actually, it's Kissinger, right? And so, well, then, and these guys are offshoots of the Roundtable organizations, right? And so them and many other sub-organizations like them, that are the outer rings of the rings within rings and rings of power. Yeah.
And they were part of like the black nobility in Italy and all that stuff too. There's a whole history of them. I think it was Kissinger kidnapping a prime minister of Italy or something. I have to tinker it a little bit more. It's somewhere in there. I remember reading something about that, but it's not vivid. But okay.
And so now, what are they actually saying? What type of, because they're all set up as like advisory groups.
That's how it started.
To advise politicians. And as we've seen before, politicians are groomed here, kind of like Klaus has already said, the young world leaders or the young global leaders. Well, those guys are the new crops that then go, and then they're funded by these same corporations that are behind them. You have BlackRock, Blackstone, and Vanguard.
You're watching our highlight version of the full show that we did. To view the full version of the podcast, you can click the link below in the description.
Stay up to date with everything Iconic by following us on all of our social media. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. To support us, you can go to theiconiclabel.com and purchase a hoodie, hat, or gear. You can also support us by going to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast and making a monthly contribution.